before the lawsuit, before the headlines, before anyone dared question the golden image, there was Pharrell Williams, the man who doesn't seem to age, the producer who shaped an entire generation of sound, the face of creativity, positivity, and effortless genius. To the world, Pharrell was untouchable, the hitmaker behind Happy, the visionary behind the Neptunes, the cultural architect who helped define pop, hip-hop, and R&B for over 2 decades. But behind the sunglasses, the designer hats, and the endless accolades, a different story was quietly forming. A story that didn't surface on red carpets, a story that didn't make award show speeches, a story that stayed hidden until now. Because in January 2026, something happened that sent shockwaves through the music industry. Chad Hugo, Pharrell's longtime partner, collaborator, and co-creator of the Neptunes, filed a federal lawsuit against him. Not a disagreement, not a misunderstanding, a lawsuit alleging fraudulent and malicious conduct, and suddenly, the narrative cracked. For over 30 years, Pharrell and Chad were inseparable in music history. Together, they created the sound that dominated radio in the early 2000s. Their fingerprints were everywhere: Britney Spears, Jay-Z, Justin Timberlake, Snoop Dogg, Gwen Stefani. They weren't just producers, they were the sound of an era. So when Chad, the quiet one, the behind-the-scenes genius, stepped forward with legal documents instead of interviews, the industry took notice. Because people don't sue their creative partners of 3 decades unless something has gone terribly wrong. And the allegations weren't small. They weren't emotional, they were precise. Claims of hidden finances, missing royalties, withheld information, and business decisions made without consent. Suddenly, a pattern began to emerge. And that's when people started remembering something else. Because Chad wasn't the first person to raise concerns. Years earlier, an artist named Khalees had spoken publicly about being misled, underpaid, and silenced. At the time, many dismissed her, called her bitter, said she didn't understand the business. But now, her words felt uncomfortably familiar. 2 voices, 2 different eras, 1 recurring theme. And that's when the question shifted from why now to something far more unsettling. What if the story had been hiding in plain sight the whole time? Because when the same accusations surface from different people, across decades, in entirely different situations, that's no longer coincidence. That's a pattern. And in this documentary, we're going to unpack it, carefully, clearly, and without speculation, starting with how one of the most successful partnerships in music history began to unravel behind closed doors. To understand why this lawsuit matters, you have to understand just how powerful the Neptunes really were. This wasn't a hit streak. This wasn't a lucky run. This was domination. By the early 2000s, Pharrell Williams and Chad Hugo weren't just producing music. They were controlling the sound of pop culture itself. At their peak, nearly half of all songs playing on US radio had their fingerprints on them. Let that sink in. Britney Spears, I'm a Slave for You. Nelly's Hot in Who. Gwen Stefani's Hollaback Girl. Justin Timberlake's Justified Era. Jay-Z, Snoop Dogg, Clips, Busta Rhymes, hit after hit, year after year. And what made it even more impressive, their sound was unmistakable, minimalist, funk-driven, experimental, stripped-down beats with futuristic bounce. That was the Neptunes. But behind the sound, there was a division of labor few people questioned. Pharrell was the face, the voice, the interviews, the fashion, the star. Chad was the technician, the composer, the programmer, the architect of the sound itself. Together, they were unstoppable. And that's what made the partnership seem unbreakable. But here's what most fans didn't see: the business side. Because while the music was revolutionary, the contracts were traditional, complex, opaque, and heavily tilted toward whoever controlled the paperwork. Behind the scenes, the Neptunes weren't just artists. They were a company. Multiple companies, actually, production entities, publishing entities, touring entities, merchandising entities. And according to Chad's lawsuit, somewhere along the way, control shifted. He alleges that financial information became harder to access, that revenue streams became less transparent, that songs began appearing in systems without his name attached, Not missing from the charts, missing from royalty databases. And that's critical, because in the music industry, if a song doesn't appear in your royalty portal, it's like it never existed. No record. No payment. No trail. Just silence. What makes this even more unsettling is the timing. Chad claims he began requesting access to financial records years ago and was denied. Not once. Not twice. Repeatedly. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was a pattern, and as the years went on, the silence grew louder. The music still played. The brand still thrived. But the partnership, the foundation of it all, was quietly eroding. And that brings us to the moment everything changed, because when Chad finally decided to stop asking and started filing paperwork instead. The story of the Neptunes stopped being about music and started becoming about control. January 23, 2026. That's the date everything stopped being speculation. Because that's when Chad Hugo filed a federal lawsuit, not in private arbitration, not behind closed doors, but in open court. And what he alleged wasn't small. It wasn't emotional. It was surgical. According to the filing, Chad accused Pharrell Williams of fraudulent and malicious conduct, language that carries serious legal weight. Not negligence. Not misunderstanding. Intent. The lawsuit claims that over several years, Chad was systematically cut off from financial information he was legally entitled to see. Not delayed. Not summarized. Denied. He alleges that financial records were withheld. Royalty data was inaccessible. Revenue streams were diverted. Business decisions were made without his consent. And perhaps most alarming of all, songs he worked on allegedly disappeared from royalty tracking systems entirely. To understand how serious that is, you need to understand how music royalties work. Every song generates a digital trail, streams, radio spins, licensing, commercials, films. These are tracked by collection agencies and royalty portals. Artists rely on these systems to know what they are owed. If a song isn't listed there, it's as if it never existed. And if it doesn't exist in the system, it doesn't pay. Chad claims that multiple works, songs he helped create, were missing from those databases. Not underreported, missing. And when he asked questions, he alleges he got silence. Even more troubling, the lawsuit claims he was blocked from reviewing company financials going back years, despite being a founding partner. Think about that. A co-creator of one of the most successful production duos in music history. Unable to see the books of his own company. Then came the trademark issue. According to court filings, Pharrell allegedly attempted to register the Neptunes trademark under his name alone, without Chad's consent, the name they built together. The brand they created as partners. The identity that made them legends. If true, it meant ownership was being rewritten, quietly, and this wasn't the first time. In 2024, Chad had already filed a lawsuit over similar concerns. That case was unresolved when this second, far more aggressive filing appeared. Which raised a terrifying question. If the money was clean, if the paperwork was fair, why did this keep happening? Because lawsuits like this don't come lightly. They come after years of frustration. After unanswered questions. After trust has completely collapsed, and the deeper investigators looked, the more familiar the pattern felt. Because this wasn't the first time someone had claimed they were misled, years earlier, another artist had said something eerily similar. And at the time, no one listened. Long before Chad Hugo filed a lawsuit. Long before lawyers and court documents entered the picture. Someone else tried to tell this story. Her name was Khalees. And in 2020, when she finally spoke publicly about her experience with the Neptunes, most people didn't listen. They dismissed her. They called her bitter, difficult, ungrateful. They said she was angry about Beyoncé. They said she didn't understand the business. They said she was exaggerating. But now, in light of what's unfolding, her words feel different, because Khalees didn't accuse anyone of being mean. She accused them of lying. She said she had been blatantly misled and tricked. That she was told one thing verbally, and later discovered the paperwork said something else entirely. And the most important detail, she said she was 19 years old when it happened. 19. New to the industry. Trusting the people guiding her career. According to her, she was told the deal was split evenly, that everyone involved would share fairly. But years later, when she finally understood how publishing worked, she realized she hadn't received what she believed she was owed. And when she confronted them, the response wasn't empathy. It was paperwork. You signed it. That was the explanation. Not, let's fix this. Not, let's walk through the numbers. Just, you signed it, and that moment changed everything. Because what Khalees described wasn't confusion, it was imbalance, power on one side, inexperience on the other. Trust used as leverage. At the time, her story was easy to dismiss. She was a young artist,